Hi, I'm Degé Coutee with the Patient Advocacy Network at cannabissaves.lives.org, and this is your weekly edition of the Compassion Flower Report, where I bring you news and headlines about medical cannabis from around the globe. Here are some of the stories and headlines we're going to cover this week. South Korea legislature passes medical cannabis law, first in East Asia. This comes from the Marijuana Business Daily. There are a number of sites that are covering this story. I chose to bring this one to you. South Korea is looking to become the first country in East Asia to legalize medical cannabis, marking a significant milestone in the global industry and a potential turning point in how the drug is perceived in traditionally conservative societies. The country's National Assembly approved the amendment to the Narcotics Control Act on November 23rd to allow for medical marijuana. Now the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety will need to establish regulations on what exactly will be allowed and the procedure patients must follow to qualify. Medical cannabis products will be tightly restricted, but the law's approval in the legislature is seen as a breakthrough in a country many believed would be last, not among the first in Asia, to approve any use of cannabis. Story goes in a little bit more about what needs to happen next in the legislative process there, and then goes on. Reverend Samsuk Kang, with the Organization of Legalizing Medical Cannabis, said Korea's move to allow medical marijuana is a big step, but much detail needs to be sorted out regarding the regulation, and little has been released beyond what is stated in the revision bill. The organization recently launched the Korea Cannabinoid Association to appeal to the drug ministry as the regulations are being developed. A number of other countries have been vying to join Israel as the first countries in Asia to allow medical cannabis, including Thailand and Malaysia. South Korea legalizing medical cannabis, even if it will be tightly controlled with limited product selection, represents a significant breakthrough for the global cannabis industry, said Vijay Sapani, CEO of Toronto-based Ella Capital, a venture capital firm exploring emerging markets in the cannabis space. The importance of Korea becoming the first country in East Asia to allow medical cannabis at a federal level should not be understated. Now it's a matter of when other Asian countries follow Korea, not if. So we reported here on Thailand starting to make some moves. It started to look like they might be the first. And here, South Korea comes in. And of course, we've already got venture capitalists taking a look at it. The statement by the CEO of that venture capital group saying that it will be tightly controlled with limited product selection tells me, probably limited THC right now. It's going to be restrictive at the beginning. Again, I'm real happy to hear that there's a Korea Cannabinoid Association. That tells me that there are people there that want to talk about full spectrum, that they're going to be pushing for there to be a broader selection of products and ratios so that people with many different disorders and medical needs can benefit from using medical cannabis. Here's a story I want to share with you because it reminded me of a story from about 15 years ago that I want to share with you. Medical marijuana gets 113,000 more votes than all Utah congressional candidates combined. Salt Lake City, is from KUTV. Leading up to Election Day, all indications were that medical cannabis would bring people to the polls. Now we know thousands of voters skipped over other important races. Utah voters came out in record numbers for the midterm elections, more than 1 million of them. There were many reasons, I think, for people to turn out for this election, said Conyer Boyack, president of the Libertas Institute. The numbers show they were overwhelmingly concerned about medical marijuana. Boyack says that's because the issue is deeply emotional. This is his exact quote. It's a little of a clunky sentence because they obviously wrote it down verbatim. It was really unsure how it was going into the election, how it was going to turn out. So I think that motivated a lot of people to come cast their vote, Boyack said. 1,065,630 people voted for the Proposition 2 medical marijuana initiative, more than any other statewide race. Prop 2 got 2,800 more votes than both U.S. senators combined and 113,000 more votes than all 13 candidates in the state's 4 congressional districts combined. Issues are really driving the voters rather than the candidates themselves, said Oscar Mata, chief political strategist with the Weber County Democrats. Mata says that could be problematic moving forward for politicians. It kind of shows that people might be giving up on candidates and who to believe and who not to believe, Mata said. Mata says that idea could have cost one Democrat in Weber County who lost a state house seat by just a couple hundred votes. Votes, Mata says, were left on the table by people who voted for the Prop 2 initiative and not in the House race. I think that tells the parties and the candidates that we have a responsibility to try to educate voters on how their role in office can impact these propositions, Mata said. Lawmakers will start the special session to legislate Prop 2 on December 3rd. There's a committee meeting on Monday. So yeah, the legislators there are moving forward with however they're going to amend this proposition. Again, I'm very curious to see how they're going to take a voter initiative and make amendments to it. But again, we're seeing that people came out in record numbers, not because of who to vote for, but what. And it reminds me of kind of what happened in Oakland about 15, 16 years ago. There were 14 medical marijuana outlets in downtown Oakland, in this very specific district of downtown Oakland. And that little neighborhood became known as Oaksterdam, of course. And again, 14 very charming shops, very nicely self-regulated. Oakland really, during that time was doing medical marijuana right. And the city came up with their brilliant idea for regulation was to shut down all 14 dispensaries and make them all apply and give licenses to only 4. Needless to say, city council meetings were very lively. And Ed Rosenthal is in the Bay Area. He lives in Oakland. He calls Oakland his home. And if you're not familiar with who Ed Rosenthal is, he was the columnist for Ask Ed for many decades with High Times. I'm not sure if he still does that. He's written a number of books. He's known as a cultivation expert, and he is a very colorful and outspoken person. And during this particular hearing in Oakland, he got up there before the Oakland City Council and he says, "You know why you hate marijuana? It's because you're jealous of marijuana. You know why you're jealous of marijuana? Because marijuana does better at the polls than you do. People would rather vote for marijuana than vote for you. People would rather see marijuana up there than look at all of you." And Utah's election kind of demonstrates that, people want to come out and vote for these issues. They want to vote on marijuana. They rather have marijuana than anyone who is running for Congress or Senate in the state of Utah. So good for Utah. They're a medical marijuana state. It'll be exciting to see how it works out. And if they have a good system for taking care of patients. This next story is out of Texas. We don't hear a lot about medical cannabis in Texas. This story gives some really good insight into the process there. Texas-based medical cannabis oil company helping hundreds across the state. This comes from KVUE ABC out of Texas. Just a little more than a year after they first moved into their facility in Manchaca, Compassionate Cultivation continues to help their nearly 450 patients across the state through the use of medical cannabis oil. They do this by delivering low THC cannabis for those who suffer from intractable epilepsy, which causes strong seizures and at times complete loss of consciousness. The company is one of only 3 medical marijuana dispensaries in the state. They received their provisional license May 1st of 2017 and received their final licenses to operate October 31st of 2017. They harvested their first cannabis crop in January of this year and sold their first dosage in February. Since then, they said they've been able to help more than 450 patients across the state suffering from intractable epilepsy. There's only one condition that we're currently allowed to provide medicine for, and that's for people suffering from intractable epilepsy, explained Morris Denton, CEO of Compassionate Cultivation. He goes on to explain more about the medical condition. Denton said that part of the company's obligation in order to have a license is they have to ensure reasonable statewide access, which is why they deliver to patients across the entire state with no delivery charge. This medicine is already relatively expensive, and because it's not covered by insurance, it can become a pretty big line item on a family's budget. And so rather pass the cost of delivery on to the patient, we absorb that. The story says a couple other things about how to get a hold of the dispensary and ask them questions about their business. But like I said, this story gives a little insight into how things work or don't work in Texas. It shows how burdensome the regulatory process is, that you have to find a location, you have to wait for approval, and then you get provisional licenses, and you hear about temporary licenses, and then your full license, and then there's the renewal and all the inspections, and then you have to wait to have a harvest, and then you have to take your harvest, and I'm sure they're turning into tinctures, oils, capsules, something of that nature. And then after all that work, you've got 450 customers, and you're going to hand deliver your product to them in a geographic area the size of Texas. And there's only 3 businesses out there serving patients with one type of disorder. So I know from other stories on the advocacy end, there has been a lot of news about veterans wanting to get Texas on board with a much better system. So come on, Texas. You guys, Texas is known for doing stuff right. Get it together, Texas. Let's get full spectrum in there. Let's get more better access. Let's let more patients with more disorders and more need have access to this wonderful therapeutic drug. Bear with me here, you guys. This next story is really rich in information, and it backs up everything I have been sharing with you for weeks and months. I mean, if you've been following our blog, then it's what I've been saying for the last 2 or 3 years, okay? Legalizing marijuana was supposed to slow illegal activity in California. It hasn't. This is from the Press Telegram here in Southern California. The owner of a family-run cannabis farm tucked away in rural Riverside County community known for marijuana cultivation says he's paid taxes and lab tested his crop for years. At the start of this year, he thought he was well situated to join California's newly legal recreational marijuana industry, but the market quite literally refused to come to him. Prop 64, California's cannabis law, allows each community to decide where commercial marijuana is allowed, or if it's allowed at all. The farmers community said the closest area where he can legally grow his crop is miles away. He can't get a state license unless he uproots his family and sells his land at a loss. So the farmer plans on quietly staying put with his 24 plants for as long as he can before authorities force him out of business. Um, that just a side note there, in unincorporated Riverside County, a patient can have up to 24 plants. And there can be a maximum of two patients per parcel. So theoretically, this person could actually, if there are two patients there and he has proof of the recommendation, then theoretically he could have up to 48 plants on that parcel. He's hardly the only marijuana entrepreneur in California who'd prefer not to be a criminal. Consider the double life of a guy who runs a marijuana delivery service. As he's tried and failed to get a state license this year, he says he's laid off several employees and officially shuttered his business. Behind closed doors, the industry veteran is staying afloat by brokering the sale of prized California cannabis to buyers in states where weed isn't yet legal. Wholesale cannabis fetches twice its domestic price out of state with none of the taxes. A lot of people would like to be full on legitimate, the delivery operator said, but you have to pay rent, you have to be able to eat. So you've got to do what you've got to do. Multiply those stories by a few thousand, and you've got a glimpse of the size and scope of the illicit side of California's marijuana industry. Their stories, as well as market research, police activity, and other measures, suggest that even as a legal market for recreational marijuana is starting to take root in California, the illicit side of the weed business is only growing stronger. Rocky transition. California established a gray market for cannabis 22 years ago when it legalized medical marijuana. Though the drug technically was legal only for medical patients, in reality it was also pretty easy to find and relatively cheap for recreational users too. So when Prop 64 was approved by voters, promising to legalize, tax, and regulate cannabis for adults, no one expected the gray market to dissolve overnight, and the data indicates it hasn't. 2 years ago, industry trade groups estimated that California was home to 50,000 growers and some 12,500 dispensaries. But in the year that Prop 64 has been in effect, the state has issued license to only a fraction of those businesses, about 5,500 growers and 600 retailers. Experts say that's why California's tax revenue is so far falling well below budgeted projections. We've still got tons of illegal grows, said Sergeant Tyson Voss, who heads up the Riverside County Sheriff's Marijuana Eradication Team. And dispensary storefronts, a bunch of those just opened up. Just as there are bootleggers for alcohol 85 years after the end of Prohibition, there are marijuana farmers and sellers in California who say they don't intend to change the way they've operated for years. They call themselves the Free People's Market, and they prefer the risk of arrest over the fees and strict oversight that comes with joining California's newly regulated market. Their risk is minimized by the fact that Prop 64 has reduced the penalties for most marijuana crimes and eliminated others entirely. There are clearly some people who want to ride it until the wheels fall off, said Kip Morrison, founder of the California Cannabis Manufacturers Association. But that attitude accounts for only part of the state's current illicit market. There are ambitious newcomers who hope to make a mark in California's newly legal weed industry. There are also many longtime industry veterans who wanted to leave behind the anxiety and the limited opportunities of the state's former gray market. Operators from both camps are ending 2018 with at least one foot planted firmly in the illicit market. The reason? They have no pathways to get licenses. A result of local bans, zoning rules, and pricey registration fees. They've also been frustrated by a lack of access to startup capital, a lack of viable real estate, and the sluggish rollout of local commercial cannabis programs. There are thousands of people who would love to participate in the regulated market who are totally locked out, said Casey O'Neill, a longtime Mendocino County cannabis farmer who's on the leadership board for the California Growers Association trade group. O'Neill says he knows people who've spent their life savings trying to comply with state rules, only to discover some barrier to entry they can't overcome. Many, O'Neill added, are heartbroken to be shut out of an industry they helped build. But most of these businesses are small farms with little capital and no way to get more, since the federal rules on marijuana make legal business loans out of reach. As a result, O'Neill said people are stuck choosing between their ethics and the need to feed their families. Those people, he added, have definitely propped up the unregulated market. A temporary problem? Regulators and researchers are confident that any boost Prop 64 is giving to the state's illicit cannabis market is only temporary. A final draft of the state regulations is slated to be adopted in January, which many say will remove much of the uncertainty that operators have faced during the first year of legalization. It's not uncertainty, people. It's the expense. Unless you're going to lower the taxes and the fees, it ain't about uncertainty. It's about the money. Also coming is the fundamental shift in California's strategy regarding the illicit market. Earlier this year, regulators tried the carrot approach to regulation, encouraging operators to join the legal market. Encourage them how? Recently, they've turned to the stick, cracking down on operators who aren't making an effort to join the regulated market. The Bureau of Cannabis Control in recent months has partnered with other state and local authorities, serving search warrants at a handful of unlicensed shops and delivery services. More resources will be dedicated to enforcement in 2019. But some argue the crackdown alone won't work, saying the state needs to expand the number of licenses it issues and find other ways to bring operators into compliance, like make it affordable. Enforcement without opportunity is a broken paradigm, said cannabis farmer and trade group leader O'Neill. So far, only about 1 in 3 cannabis communities allows any form of cannabis business, according to a database of local policies compiled by the Southern California News Group. More cities are coming on board each quarter, but O'Neill and others note that the pace is much slower than anyone anticipated. That patchwork city-by-city legality of weed in California is creating huge holes in the market, holes that illicit operators have been filling for decades. Even in communities where leaders or voters are opting to welcome the cannabis industry, zoning rules and other regulations have left thousands of businesses with no way to legally operate. There are an estimated 1,000 cannabis growers, for example, operating in rural, unincorporated areas of Riverside County, according to Jim Montez, executive director of the Inland Empire NORML. But the county just approved zones for commercial marijuana businesses that exclude nearly all of those farms, effectively banishing the others to go out of business or continue as illicit growers. Montez says the city of San Bernardino's cap of 17 cultivation licenses assumes the several hundred growers already operating in warehouses scattered throughout the city will leave town. But unregulated cannabis operators pose tough questions in cities and counties. While the long-term presence of an illicit business doesn't mean that the industry is a good fit for neighbors or the environment, will refusing to license those businesses make them disappear? And if those businesses go away, what happens to the community when they leave? Cannabis operations in parts of California, long before Prop 64, rented warehouse space, and employed residents. Indirectly, the industry was a factor in everything from increasing property values to lowering the need for social services. Like it or not, the unregulated cannabis market was a massive support system for rural economies all over the state, O'Neill said. How not to end prohibition. Some of the observers of California's cannabis industry suggest the state hasn't learned from history. In 1934, when prohibition was ending in the United States, there's a little history, brief history background. Prop 64 lowered the penalties for illegal operators, essentially inducing operators to stay in the shadows. It also launched a regulation system that includes strict rules on everything from growing to product testing and insurance. And it set tax rates that, when combined with city taxes in some communities, can add 50% to the price of the product. What they're doing with all the barriers to entry and all the taxes and the fees is they're stifling the ability to control the supply, Morrison said, of California's cannabis regulations. That should be the focus at this time. Take whatever steps you need to have the regulated market actually control the supply. Do consumers care? Nearly a year into legal weed in California, one thing is clear. Illicit weed merchants have no trouble finding customers. 1 in 5 Californians said they'd purchased cannabis from an unlicensed shop in the past 3 months, according to a survey conducted this summer by marijuana delivery platform Ease. Consumers in Southern California are more likely to purchase from an unlicensed source than are consumers in Northern California, and a whopping 84% of all respondents are inclined to buy again from an illegal source, saying products are cheaper and sometimes better. Pardon me, I have this little tickle in my throat. Illicit shops remain easy to find through online directories like Weed Maps, which still list them despite receiving a cease and desist letter from state regulators. The Irvine-based company declined to talk for this story. A comparison of products available from stores listed on Weed Maps shows the price discrepancies. Shoppers can buy marijuana for as little as $7 a gram at unlicensed shops in Orange County cities that theoretically don't allow such stores, but shoppers go to licensed stores in Santa Ana, the only city in the county that permits them, and generally pay $13 to $15 a gram and up to $20 a gram when all the taxes are included. That doesn't factor in other perks that illicit shops can offer, such as higher potency products and free samples. Price isn't the only issue. Customers are willing to pay for cannabis that has been tested for safety, properly labeled, and sold in legal shops, according to a study published this September in the journal Addiction. But there's clearly a limit to how much they'll pay, according to Michael Omlung, a psychiatry professor at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada, who headed up the study. Even if illicit weed is cheaper, the study finds consumers are willing to spend up to $10 a gram to support the legal market. But beyond the $10 threshold, customers start turning to the illicit market, Omlung said. The findings are firm enough that economic models can be predicted from them. For example, a 5% cut in the overall tax rate of cannabis in California could drive 23% of the illicit market customers back to the legal market, the Ease survey found. But it will take time for such changes to put a dent in California's illicit market. I think it will be 5 or more years before it gets somewhat under control, said Riverside County Sheriff Sergeant Voss, as they struggle to comply with state regulations and fend off competition from the illicit sector. Many licensed businesses aren't sure they'll be able to survive another few years until the market stabilizes. We've been talking about all of that here on the Compassion Flower Report. And, we saw it come. We've been talking about it before the Compassion Flower Report. We've been talking about this ever since the AUMA, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, was filed with the Secretary of State. Ever since we read those 62 pages, we said, whoa, this is so much hyper regulation. This is going to be so expensive. This is going to still have marijuana deserts in the state where there's limited to no access. This is not a good law. In theory, yeah, everybody wanted to legalize marijuana. And people like myself and my colleagues, we were called names. We were told we were crazy. We were gaslighted. We were anti-regulation, anti-legalization. No, we're pro-smart laws. We're pro-laws that work. And here, another story, as many we've posted, demonstrate the regulations in California aren't working. Until the price at the register, out the door, in the bag, is the same as the price on the corner, you're going to have this illicit market problem. You're probably always going to have part of an illicit market problem. But honestly, if the retail shops were allowed to compete, Sacramento has a stranglehold on them. They can't compete because these regulations aren't letting them compete with the unregulated market. If their prices were the same, people would go in there. The only market that would really be left would be the cottage market, if you even want to call it. It's that person, it's that guy that could have 48 plants in Riverside that, every year around harvest time, all his friends get a little sack. Is that legal under Prop 64? No, you're not allowed to give it away. You're not allowed to just grow weed and give it to people. But are they really going to be able to stop that? And how few and far between is that going to be compared to all the people in the big cities in California, people just walking in and getting their medicine? Sacramento, you need to figure this out. It's a brand new year coming up in 2019. The Patient Advocacy Network, we're going to be working really hard on this issue in Sacramento to make sure that every single day of the week that the legislature is reminded just how many aspects of Prop 64 need to be fixed, that we need to reform Prop 64. And they will be educated on what needs to be reformed. And reforming Prop 64 is, while it's going to be a struggle and it's going to be time consuming, it is going to be a heck of a lot cheaper than trying to run a voter initiative. We had a record number of voters come out in California this year, which means the number of signatures it's going to take to get anything on the ballot now has skyrocketed, just because that the number of signatures you need to get is a percentage of the people who came out and voted, and a lot of people came out and voted. So I don't know what those numbers are yet. I'm sure that we're going to be looking at the election being certified here in California, I guess by December 8th or 9th, and then all those new numbers will be available. And it'll be a good reminder to anybody who wants to run a voter initiative, just, how much it's going to cost. So Patient Advocacy Network, we're going to be, of course, advocating for patients in Sacramento all next year. We want and need your support. We want your involvement. I want your input. And with that, I want to give you just a brief introduction to this next story. Free medical marijuana for low-income individuals bill to be reintroduced Monday. This is from East County Today. You heard me throughout these past several weeks during the end of the California legislature saying compassionate care, compassionate care, compassionate care. Compassionate care is back. On Thursday, Senator Scott Wiener and co-author Nancy Skinner held a press conference announcing they will be reintroducing SB 829, which would provide free medical cannabis to low-income people with serious illnesses. The bill is being introduced because Governor Jerry Brown vetoed the bill even after the state legislature overwhelmingly supported it. So that's Jerry Brown's legacy, vetoing compassion. When it was vetoed, I mentioned then that I anticipated it would be reintroduced. It is being reintroduced, so we've got a lot of work to do with our legislature. California deserves to have the best cannabis laws in the world. Mary Jane deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, and she wants to be available affordably to every single patient who needs her. So I look forward to all of your support and involvement as we move into the next legislative session. All these stories and many more are always available for you at our Twitter at Pan4Compassion. I will include that link in the description below. Please sign up for email updates at cannabissaveslives.org for news and information and action alerts. I thank you for watching. Please donate. Patient Advocacy Network is a charitable 501c3 organization. Your donation is always tax deductible. Please visit our website at cannabissaveslives.org and click the donate button. Become a monthly sponsor in any amount a month that's right for you. Please like this video, subscribe, share with your friends. Until next week, I'm Degé Coutee, and this has been the Compassion Flower Report.